How's the stashes? My name is Dr. Jacob Seidnote. Yes, it is still me. I just got a crew cut over the weekend because someone is getting married next weekend. How about that? And you're watching the Historian Stash. This week has been full of news stories. The biggest one is, of course, the fate of the GNU, the Government of National Unity. Is the DA out? Well, the verdict is still out, and we're probably not going to hear anything until the end of this week. Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs because in the meantime, our economy is falling due to the insecurity or due to the instability within the government and the uncertainty created by this looming question, and also by the ominous exit of the DA from the GNU, because they are obviously the majority ally to, or the majority stakeholder to the ANC, so we are not certain of what is going to happen once they leave. But today's episode is not about current headline news, rather it's a topic that has continuously been headline news for decades, and that is the question of land and land reform. Now, before we continue with this video, please don't forget to like and share it if you like seeing this face telling you some interesting things. And also, please select that subscribe button. And please don't forget to buy me a coffee. Coffee will go a long way in getting me through towards the wedding day, and I would very much appreciate your support. Maybe this is your guys' way of a wedding present. Who knows? I didn't say anything. I said nothing. Now, of course, the land issue is a sensitive topic and every person has their own opinion on it. The danger comes when these opinions are formed through distorted facts and political rhetoric. Okay, so for example, there's this meme that's been doing the rounds on the internet since 2018, which goes as follows. Here's a fact about South Africa. Now, ordinarily when it starts off like that, then that's the first red flag goes off. Here's a fact about South Africa, then it's probably not factual. But anyways, the fact is that in total, white South Africans own 357,507 hectares of urban land and 26,663,144 hectares of the agricultural land, which includes vast areas of the semi-desert Karoo. The total area of South Africa is 122 million hectares, which means white people privately own only 22% of this land. Who owns the other 78%? Why is all the focus on the 22% and not the 78%? Now, this meme takes some factual liberties from the National Land Audit of 2017. According to the audit, 26.7 million hectares of farmland is owned by whites. So that part of the meme is correct. But that 26.7 million hectares of farmland is 72% of total farming or arable land. So in other words, it's 72% of land that can be used for agriculture, not the total area. Okay? Similarly, white people own 357,507 hectares of urban land, as the meme suggests, but that is actually 49% of total urbanized land. Then there is a third category that's not mentioned in the meme. This is individual sectional title, and it refers to people who've bought a unit within an estate or complex. This obviously makes up a smaller area of land than the first two categories. And here, white owners make up 45% of this category. Now, the total landmass of South Africa is 122 million hectares, but not all of that is or can be utilized. Okay, some of it is vacant or it's pure desert and simply no one wants it. So this meme dishonestly misrepresents and distorts facts that are true to push a certain narrative. Meanwhile, on the other hand, our favorite comrade Juju spoke to some people over the weekend in Sophiatown, and in an attempt to stay relevant, he doubled down on his party's radical stance on land reform, vowing that if the EFF was in government, it would expropriate farms without compensation and hand them to farm workers. This comes while he has been expressing readiness to enter the government of national unity, but only if the ANC removes the DA from the GNU. Oh, and while he was speaking to this crowd, he somehow got into an argument with a dude that's been dead for 300 years. Yeah, that's right, he resumed his grudge match against Jan van Riebeeck, calling old Jan a criminal, and demanded the reversal of land theft that began in 1652, sparking renewed debate about South Africa's land policies. Malema said, "We present to you on the day at which the whites landed in South Africa to steal our land, the 6th of April 1652, when Jan van Riebeeck did arrive at the Cape. Those whites led by Jan van Riebeeck." I really wish I could say it in his accent, but I think that might come across as problematic. But yeah, Jan van Riebeeck. They were actually criminals from the jails of Netherlands. So somehow he confused the history of the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company, and the Cape with that of the British starting a penal colony for British prisoners in Australia. Juju, we are not in Australia. This is South Africa. Wrong continent. So Juju then also rejected the current Expropriation Act signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa and vowed to fight for land to be returned to its rightful owners without compensation. Now, here at the Historian's Stash, we welcome claims and opinions as long as they are supported and corroborated by verifiable facts. Otherwise, we just laugh. Because that's what academia is. At least it's what it's supposed to be. It's the stimulation and encouragement of critical thinking. To think outside the box, challenging dominant mainstream narratives, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient they may be. But critical thinking comes with responsibility. This challenge needs to be supported with tangible, factual data. But that's what most politicians and political commentators seem to ignore for the sake of their own agendas. My only agenda is teaching whoever may want to listen how to think critically in a balanced and responsible way. And it just so happens that the land question and the debate around land is my topic of choice. My PhD dissertation was on land claims in South Africa and the court's approaches in dealing with these claims. But I'm not saying that my opinion is exclusively right, because there are other brilliant theses out there that challenge my own thesis, albeit partially. But I did spend 3 years of my life working on this research, so I think this information might be interesting and valuable to those of you who really would like to know more about the land question in South Africa, more than what you are told by news networks and politicians. Now, the truth is not as clear-cut as politicians from both the left and the right would have you believe. So buckle up as we look at the history of land reform in South Africa. Just a warning that this will probably take more than one episode. So I'll probably stop, not abruptly, but I'll stop halfway and then create another episode. Now, in 1994, the newly elected ANC-led government emphasized its multiple objectives, namely addressing dispossession and injustice, creating a more equitable distribution of land, reducing poverty and assisting economic growth, providing security of tenure, establishing competent land administration, and contributing to national reconciliation. The rural poor were to be the primary beneficiaries. These were victims of land dispossession, small-scale farmers, farm workers, labor tenants, communal area residents, women, and the youth. Now, at the time, in 1994, 85.1% of agricultural land was owned by white people. So the main question was, how was the government going to meet these objectives? Initially, the willing buyer, willing seller system was introduced to deal with the redistribution of land. Now, a lot has been spoken about and written about willing buyer, willing seller, but in essence, it means a voluntary transaction between farmers and the government to acquire land earmarked for expropriation. As we know, progress was slow in the first 5 years, and most targets were not met. For example, a target to redistribute 30% of commercial farmland in the first 5 years wasn't even close to being met. Now, this was partly due to the unwillingness of white farmers to sell land to the government. But this unwillingness came from a deep fear of what would become of the land once it's owned by the state. Many of these farms were owned by the same family for multiple generations spanning centuries. So to give that up while it was still economically successful was understandably difficult. Now, on the other hand, the government had all these objectives and aims, but no real plan to implement them without jeopardizing the food security of the country. You had pilot schemes that were just fast-tracked into policy, so there was no real planning behind them, and the government didn't really have a plan on how to redistribute farms properly when it involved large groups of people. Instead, it expected entire communities of people to operate farms as single commercial enterprises. I mean, this inevitably caused conflict on how to best utilize the land, as you can imagine. Now, during these first 5 years, a host of new land laws were passed aimed mainly at securing land rights. Farm workers and dwellers were protected from arbitrary evictions, and the occupation and use rights of labor tenants were protected. But tenants or former tenants could also apply for ownership of the land they occupied. Communal property associations, or CPAs, allowed groups to hold restored and redistributed land. But communal tenure was highly politicized because of the lobbying power of traditional leaders. So as a result, progress in developing a policy framework was slow and incomplete. Then in 1999, policy priorities shifted from meeting the needs of the poor to servicing a group of aspirant black commercial farmers. Market efficiency and the deracialization of commercial farming received renewed emphasis. The Land Redistribution for Agricultural Development, or LRAD program, replaced earlier policy frameworks and was complemented by a comprehensive agricultural support program. But many of the problems experienced in the first 5 years of land reform resurfaced. You had official processes which remained slow and cumbersome, plagued by poor coordination between the different departments and spheres of government. Beneficiaries who were part of communities pooled their grants they got from redistribution projects to purchase large farms, but they were not allowed to subdivide these. So the same problem of large communities being forced to operate farms as single commercial enterprises just simply continued. Now, the government's obsession with the large-scale commercial farming model led to a dominating planning and thinking about post-settlement support. Agricultural expert Ben Cousins points out that consultants based in the large farm sector remained the main source of expertise for processes of farm business planning, and there was often a large gap between business plans and the needs, desires, and capacities of beneficiaries. Unfortunately so. So, by the turn of the 21st century, project failures contributed to a public perception that land reform was indeed in trouble. A national land summit held in 2005 agreed on a review of willing buyer, willing seller, as well as the expanded use of expropriation and a proactive role of the state. The following year saw several new policy changes: area-based planning, a proactive land acquisition strategy, a draft expropriation bill, and reports on foreign land ownership, as well as land ceilings and land taxes. The ANC's National Conference in Polokwane in 2007 emphasized the need for an integrated program of rural development, land reform, and agrarian change. But once again, little came of these new directions in terms of implementation strategies, and the rhetoric around land reform for smallholders hid the complete neglect of small-scale producers, with funds for comprehensive agricultural support directed to a minority of large-scale producers. Land restitution continued to move slowly, obstructed by a small budget, capacity problems, and inadequate funds for post-settlement support. Tenure reform was largely overlooked, with the Department of Land Affairs devoting few resources to implementing the Land Reform Labour Tenants Act of 1996, or the Extension of Security of Tenure Act 62 of 1997, also known as ESTA. And CPAs, or the Communal Property Associations, and landholding trusts were mostly neglected. As a result, evictions of workers from commercial farms continued, both preemptively and in response to competitive pressures, indicating the weakness of the legal system. The Communal Land Rights Act was passed in 2004, premised on transferring ownership of land from the state to traditional councils and the chiefs. This would effectively convert that land into feudal land. Crazy. Thankfully, this was never implemented. It was struck down by the Constitutional Court on procedural grounds in 2010. Now, after 2009, rural development, food security, and land reform were identified as priorities of the Jacob Zuma government, and so the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, or the DRDLR, was created. In 2019, this department merged with Agriculture to become the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, or the DALRRD. Now, in the next episode, I will continue with the policy directions taken by the Zuma administration, leading to the abomination that was the Restitution of Land Rights Amendment Bill, and then the wild ride that has been the Ramaphosa administration's handling of the land question. Hopefully this episode has helped a lot of you in understanding the complexity around land and land reform and restitution in South Africa, and I hope it's proved to be informative. I'd also really like to hear from you. Maybe some of you had real life experiences in the policies which I've mentioned here. So please drop your comments down below. I'd really like to hear from you. Please also don't forget to buy me a coffee. Really appreciate it as a wedding gift. I'm probably going to be quiet in the next week because, hey, wedding preparations. But hope to hear from you, and please keep on giving the support. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, stay stashy and bye. Bye bye.